So today we're going to be going over module 5.1. It's called congruent triangles. And our objective is how can you show that two triangles are congruent? So let's get into our first example. So explain one. It says deciding if triangles are congruent by comparing corresponding parts. So if two triangles are congruent, what we're trying to figure out here is how do we show that they're congruent? So two triangles are congruent if and only if we say corresponding pairs of sides and corresponding pairs of angles are congruent. So all the sides, all the angles have to be congruent to each other for two triangles to be congruent. So look at example 1. It says determine whether given triangles are congruent and explain. So we look at the two triangles and we look for all the sides and all the angles being congruent to each other. So if I look at the sides here, so let me start with side JG. This is 2. And that corresponds over here to MK, which are both 2. So those are congruent. And let's look at another side. JH is 1. ML is 1. So that's congruent. And if I look at third side, GH is 1.7, which means that LK is also 1.7. So all three sides are congruent. And let's look at the angles now. So angle J is 60, which means the angle M is also 60. Angle G is 30. Angle K is over here is 30. And that leaves our last angle. Angle H is 90. And then angle L is also 90. So all angles and all sides are corresponding and congruent. So we say all corresponding sides and angles are congruent, which means that the two triangles are congruent. So we have to write our congruency statement. So we say triangle JGH is congruent to triangle MKL. Okay, so let's look at the next example. So here, let's look at are these two triangles congruent? So all you have to really figure out, see is if one side does not match, that automatically tells you they're not congruent. So if you look here at side CB, which is 8.5, and then side EF, 8.4, these two do not equal each other. The other sides do, but since these two do not equal each other, we say that side CB does not equal FE, which means that the two triangles are not congruent to each other. And just as long as one part does not match, not congruent to each other, it's not congruent. Let's look at number 4 on your turn. Again, we're determining whether the given triangles are congruent. Explain your reasoning. So here, if I look at triangle RST and then triangle WVU, I look at the sides. So the little tick mark here, that means that these sides are the same. And then I look at the other tick mark over here, the one that has 2 of them, that corresponds to this one over here. So that means all the sides are the same. And now look at the angles. We have 71, 71, 71, and 71 here. And then we have that 38 over here. And that corresponds to this one over here. So that means that tells us that since all corresponding sides and angles are congruent, it means that the two triangles are congruent. Now let's look at number 5. Again, if you notice one thing that's not the same or congruent to each other from one triangle to the other, that automatically means that they're not congruent. And here, first thing I noticed was that angle D is 79 and angle G is 78, which means that these two are not equal to each other, not congruent. So automatically we could just say not congruent because angle D does not equal angle G. 179, 178. So that tells us the two triangles are not congruent to each other. Okay, so now we're going to be applying properties for congruent triangles. So we're going to find the value of the variable that results in congruent triangles. So if I'm looking at these two triangles, I'm kind of assuming that they're congruent. So I'm going to say that triangle JKL is congruent to triangle MNP. So if I look at the variable I'm trying to solve for here, it's X. So angle P, that corresponds to angle L. But they don't give you a value for angle L. They only give you a value of the two other angles. So I know that the three angles in the triangle add up to 180 degrees. They're supplementary, all three of them. So what I do first to solve for that missing angle is I add the two given angles and I subtract that from 180 to give me 80 degrees. So that means that angle L is 80 degrees. So I know that these two angles equal each other, L and P. So what I do here is I take 80, equal it to 5x plus 30. So what I do next is I want to solve for x. So I'm going to subtract 30 from both sides. And then again, 80 minus 30 gives me 50. So I'm going to get 50 equals 5x. And I divide by 5. So divide by 5. And that gives me 10. So x equals 10 will make the two triangles congruent. Okay, so let's go to part B now. Again, I want to make sure that find the value of y that makes these two triangles congruent. So right now, if you look at the angles, all three angles are congruent to each other. So we write our congruency statement. Triangle ABC, congruent to triangle DEF. So what I'm trying to figure out here is what sides are congruent to each other. And so I'm trying to find this side, and that side corresponds to this side over here. So that means that side AB and DE are equal to each other, or they're congruent. So then I just substitute in the values. So AB is 36, DE is 2y plus 20. So again, all I do is want to solve for y right here. So first thing I do is subtract 20 from both sides. So I get 36 minus 20 gives me 16. So I get 16 equals 2y. Then I divide by 2, or y equals 8. So y equals 8 will make the two triangles congruent to each other. Okay, so now let's look at your turn. So here it says, find the value of the variable that results in congruent triangles. So again, if these two triangles are congruent, I set up my congruency statement. So BCD is congruent to triangle EFG. So if I look at, again, the first letter here, B and E, and that tells us, because if you write a congruency statement, that tells us what sides or angles correspond to each other. So I know that angle B and angle E, they correspond to each other. They're equal in measure. So again, I'm only given two angles. I need to find the third. So again, I add them up. I get 137. I subtract that from 180. I get 51. That means angle B is 51 degrees. So now I just set both angles equal to each other. 51 equals x plus 17. I would subtract 17 from both sides, which gives me x equals 34 as my variable that makes the two triangles congruent. Okay, now let's go to last example. This one right here. So I need to solve for y so that the two triangles are congruent. So if I write out my congruency statement here, I have KJL congruent to triangle NMP. So again, I look at side JK or KJ. That corresponds to side NM. So I just substitute in the values here. So Kj is 4y plus 12. Knm is 32. So again, I subtract 12 from both sides. And I get 4y equals 20. And I divide by 4. Divide both sides by 4. So 20 divided by 4, that gives me 5. So y equals 5 is what makes the two triangles congruent. Okay, so we're done with today's notes. So make sure you get your stamp for completion and begin and finish your assignment by the end of the period.